Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. My name is Andrew Townsend. I'm an e-learning evangelist here at eLearning Brothers. Today we're going to be talking about Captivate 2017, a beginner's guide to Captivate 2017. This webinar will be recorded, and we'll get a copy of it emailed out to everyone who is registered, and we'll also post it on our website early next week so that you can share that or watch it again at your leisure. Today to talk to us about Captivate, we have Adam Cannon, our Captivate Evangelist, with us today. Thank you for joining us, Adam. We're glad to have you with us. If you guys have questions during the webinar, we'll be ready to answer your questions in the questions panel or during the webinar, so feel free to use that questions panel as you need it. We'll get to as many of those questions as we can. If we can't get to your question, we will do our best to continue the conversation in the webinar recap, or you can send us an email at info@elearningbrothers.com, and we respond to questions there. Just so you know, one of the things that we like to do after the webinar is try to follow up as soon as possible. Usually it's just to get feedback and touch base, find out if you need more clarification one-on-one on the subject topic. All right, without further ado, I'll go ahead and turn the time over to you, Adam.
Great, thanks, Andrew. All right, well, welcome everyone. I'm glad to be here and glad to be presenting to you about a topic that I'm passionate about, and we titled this "Fall in Love with Captivate 2017," kind of in the Valentine's Day mood a little bit. Captivate is a wonderful tool. It's very powerful, and you can do a lot with it. And so I wanted to give people kind of an intro to it. And that being said, make sure you understand that this is a beginner's guide. This is an introduction to Captivate. While there's information that may come that could benefit you if you're a veteran user, this is really the target audience for this is those who are brand new to Captivate and just figuring it out. So one of the things I want to start with is just a question, and Andrew can kind of feed the answers as they come across the question panel. So you'll use the question panel in your response to formulate it. So what I'm looking for is, how long have you been doing e-learning? Whether it's weeks or years or days, give me some responses.
All right, some of these responses are coming in. 2 years, 2 months, 1.5 years, just a few months, around 6 months, 4 years, 2.5 years, forever, somebody said.
Forever.
Born doing e-learning. 30 days out of college, doing e-learning in college, and now 30 days out of college. Just getting started, 16 years. There's one, 10 years. Grad school for instructional design. Oh, that's great. Thanks, Kathy. Thanks for joining us. 20 years. Janice, that's a lot of years for e-learning. That's great. Several years on and off, many years, 7 years curriculum development and design. Oh, I'm sorry, design for 3 months, but curriculum development for 7 years.
Oh, great. Those are we can see a wide range of answers there, from 20 years to since I was born to, just in school or just getting out of school. And to those who are just coming out of school, congratulations on making it through, and welcome to the e-learning industry. I've been doing this I'm in that 15 to 20 year range. I've been doing teaching and learning for probably 25 years, but doing e-learning specifically for about 15 to 20 of those years. And so I've had a wide range of this. So the next question is, what is it that drew you to Captivate? What is it that makes you want to use Captivate, whether it's a corporate mandate or something you've heard about the tool? So let's get some of those responses as well.
There are a lot of e-learning tools out there, huh?
There are a lot. And so, what is it that draws you to Captivate, or that makes you interested in Captivate?
This person's saying that they just generally love Adobe products. Another person says a coworker suggested it. The client needed it. Employer purchased it for me. That's one response. Took a course on Captivate, and it seems to do everything we need it to. Corporate decision. Accessibility tools. It has more accessibility tools than others. Creativity options of the product. More versatility. This is what my team uses and the employer has purchased, so I've got to learn to use it. Best product I have found for e-learning development. The opinion of Kristen. It comes with free eLearning Brothers assets.
We like that answer.
So yeah, they're rolling in. It looks like a lot of the responses are because the team or company has decided that's what they're going to use, or because it seems to have the accessibility requirements that they need.
Well, good, and that that's a pretty common answer to why you would choose any tool is that either the company needs it or the client has asked you to use it. I'm passionate about all e-learning. I actually am familiar with Captivate, Storyline, and Lectora, and I've used them all. I've done various LMSs, things like that. And so my caveat is always, whenever possible, understand that you're not a one-trick pony. That each tool has their strengths and their weaknesses, but they're all fantastic for doing e-learning, and they all can do some wonderful things. And so we're going to look at Captivate today. So it sounds like we have some people who may be experienced with Captivate, and it's always great to have those people along as well. But like I said, this is going to be a very rudimentary look at Captivate, and understand that in the span of a webinar, there's a lot of stuff that I could cover. And there's a lot of stuff that I probably won't cover, just because I've kind of got my outline that I'm going with, were the topics I wanted to cover. And so if you need more information about Captivate, or if you're interested in more information, we have a lot of blogs out there. We have a whole section of Captivate blogs, some of which I've written, some of which others have written, blogs, webinars, and even support tools and videos that can help you get a good feel for Captivate. Also the Adobe forums. If you're not on the Adobe forums, and I would strongly encourage you to get out there, because they're very active, and it's really one of the better forum sites I've been to as far as getting answers from users. Unfortunately, the Adobe community, the Adobe leadership isn't as active on the forums, but there are a lot of power users out there who really do a great job of answering your questions and so forth. And like Andrew has said, we're going to try to get to all the questions we can. Sometimes questions are duplicate, and so we might answer multiple questions at once. But if we don't answer them, feel free to contact us another way, or we'll try to answer them in the webinar. So that being said, we're going to go ahead and jump into Captivate. About a year ago, Captivate released a new version called Captivate 2017. Prior to that, you may have seen 5.5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Starting with version 8, they implemented the idea of responsive design, which is the ability to create e-learning that will run and play well on mobile devices, on devices of really varying screen sizes. In 2017, they have improved upon that quite a bit. There's some new technology there. So if you're familiar with older versions of Captivate, there's going to be some new things in 2017 that you haven't seen. And so we'll go over that. So to start with, you open Captivate, and you notice a few things, and we just want to go through this really, really quickly. Down at the bottom, you have your timeline, and there's a lot of Adobe products, and really a lot of products in general, that use kind of this timeline structure, where you place your objects on the slide or on the stage, and then they appear on the timeline, and that lets you control some things of when they appear, how long they run for. It gives you some duration information, things like that. The first thing I would suggest is, anytime you place something on this timeline or on the slide, is that you give it a name, because one of the things in Captivate is it just gives it very generic names. You can see I've got placeholder 3, placeholder 4, and placeholder 5 on my timeline here. And if I go in later and try to say, okay, I'm going to create an action or a call to do something with that object, I may not know what placeholder 5 is referring to. I may want to call it something different. And so we'll go over how to change all that as well. Down here on the timeline, you can see this visibility button that basically shows or hides different items. I can show or hide them all at once or individually. And then there's the lock, which will lock or unlock items. And what that means is, if I lock this image placeholder here, which is actually placeholder 3. See, if I'd named it right, I would know that. But I can't, it's locked in place. If I put we'll show you with the new one. We'll put a square on there. And so now there's a smart shape on there. If I go fill it with something a little easier to see than white, if I lock it in place, I can't select it, I can't move it, I can't do anything with it. I can type in it, but I can't click and drag it. And so that's a good way if you've got something sitting on top. It's a good way to kind of freeze it in place. And I can unlock or lock all the items just by clicking on the icon at the top there. So that's kind of your timeline. One of the things to look at the timeline is you see down here the slide, it gives you a time stamp of 3 seconds. I can drag that out and make it as long as I want. You can see that this shape now is only running for 3 seconds. So I can take that and I can anchor it to the end, and when it anchors to the end, you see it turns red. I get this red arrow down here. That tells me it's now anchored, or is just to the length of the slide, and it's going to start moving the slide as I go that way. If I wanted to go to the end of the slide, we'll show you how to do that here in a minute. And I can also change where it starts from so that it appears later on in the slide. But you can see that these are also set to display for rest of slide. And so you have some options on that timeline. You've got display for rest of slide. You can set a time, a specific time that it appears for, or you can also say display for rest of project. And so that's kind of a quick rundown of the timeline. It's pretty powerful, and as we go, you might see some other things, and we might come back to this as we go through this project. So let me stop and see if there's any questions on kind of what I've talked about here.
Hey, Adam. Yeah, we've got a few questions here. When locking an item, is it locked in position regardless of the player, like an iPhone, desktop, etc.?
Oh, you mean in terms of like the screen size? Yeah, so it's locked in place, and there's a lot about that. So if I go in and look at the iPad, it locks it in place relative to however your position settings are set. So if I go up to my position properties and I see that this square is locked over here on the right-hand side, you can see that it's locked 13.7% from the top and 9.6% from the left side. So as I change those view sizes, it will keep that same distance from the top and from the left. So it doesn't lock it in to say, okay, it's always going to be in this place on my screen. It's going to keep it relative to the corners that it's anchored to.
Okay, more questions about different types of locks. Is there a difference between the two types of locks, or do they both operate about the same?
Two types of locks.
The lock-in-place mechanism, yes.
So yeah, there is the lock-in-place mechanism. So when I click the first one, I actually am not sure what the two types of locks are.
So if you can give us a little more clarification on your question, that'd be great. Moving on to another question. When dealing with the timeline, how does active or inactive and pause come into the mix?
Okay, so a pause will obviously pause your timeline at whatever point, and we'll get to that point as well. I can put an option on there to pause it after so many seconds. If it's a button or some kind of a media object that is playing, I can put a pause in there. I can insert a pause to say after, and so then the slide runs. If I put a pause at 3.5 seconds in and the slide's 5 seconds long, at 3.5 seconds, it's going to pause and wait for the user to do something. It's going to create a user interaction. So that's a way to put in interactivity. If you wanted it to run, for instance, in what I call kiosk mode, which is just sort of auto running and doing things, then obviously you wouldn't have pauses on your slide. Not sure what they mean by active or inactive. There's the visible on the timeline, and then there's up here on the properties panel, there's a hidden or visible in output and not visible in output, and those are kind of state changes that we'll go over here later as well. So some of these questions we may answer as we go through, and I may just not be understanding the terminology you're using, because I may call it, I don't necessarily always use the official Adobe terminology for things. I call it whatever it's meant to me or whatever I've learned it as. So I apologize if I'm not familiar with all the same terms that you're using.
We'll take one more question at this time. So as a rule of thumb, if you're locking shapes, knowing that you can lock shapes, should you be locking shapes on the screen if you are planning on changing views?
And that's a much more kind of complicated thing as you get into responsive design. There are ways to anchor the shapes, and anchoring is different from locking. I can tell it to, anchor to a certain position on the slide by setting these parameters of 10.5%. It kind of automatically keeps it at those percentages. Where you run into trouble is if I change this to pixels and I say I want this to be 52 pixels from the top, then that's going to change it's not going to keep it relative. But by putting in percentages here instead of pixels, that's where, and telling it whether I want it to anchor to the top or the bottom and then the left or the right, and even adjust the height and width, that's going to kind of do what I think you call locking in position. What this lock on the timeline does is it just keeps me from being able to select it, from being able to manipulate it and move it around, so that if I've got multiple objects stacked on top of each other and I want to go get one, you see right now I can't grab that shape, but I can grab other things around it. And so by clicking and dragging, normally if I had that unlocked and I clicked right there and tried to drag, I would drag the shape. But it's a good way of, I've got something in place, I want it to stay there while I do the project, while I, manipulate other stuff. So I'll just lock it in place to say, okay, now when I click and drag, I can't, I can't move it around. And so it stays in its place.
Excellent. So we'll take more questions later.
Okay. All right, so moving on. So we've touched on a little bit this right-hand side, which is where your various panels come in, or windows. From the file menu, I can click on window, or from this top menu bar, I can click on window, and you can see that I've got several toolbars and windows selected. There's the align toolbar, which is this across the top. There's my film strip, which is over here on the left, and then there's the timeline and the properties. And I can turn any of those off or on just by selecting that. If I want to turn off the film strip, I can turn that off. I can get rid of the master slide. I can get rid of the timeline, so forth. So I can turn them all off and on depending on how I want them to look. But we're going to focus right now on this properties panel over here on the left. The properties inspector is what it's called. And so as we kind of move from the top down, you see the top is the name of the object. So again, if I click on my shape, my smart shape, I can see it's called Smart Shape 1. And I might want to call that instead, blue square top. Something that indicates to me, okay, I put that in here. It tells me what the default state is. A state, and we'll talk about states a little more in depth here a little bit later, but there are states that you can have that are built in where it's like down, selected, hover, things like that, or you can also create states of your own. This just tells you what the initial state is. I can retain that state on slide revisit, so I can say, I want it to come back to this state when I come back. The next is the style name. You can see that there's this default style name, and it puts it in brackets to say this is one of the default Captivate names. You can always create your own styles, and we'll show you how to do that here in just a minute as well. But when it puts a plus out in front of it, that means something has changed about it. If you remember when I brought this square in, it was white. And so if I go in and I bring in another one, it's going to be white. And I can see now that in the style name on my right-hand side, it says default smart shape style. There's not a plus in front of it, but there is when I do the blue one. And one of the nice things about that is I can go in, and if I want to change it, I can say save changes to existing style, and it will cascade down and change every shape that has that smart shape style to blue. So if I don't want to do that, I can undo it, and then I can do it one by one. But that way, if I had, all my text box was filled with something and I wanted to change a style, I could go in and change those. But that plus in front of it, in front of the style name, tells you that you've done some modifications from whatever the default or the original style was. And so you can use this to go in and apply it as well. I can apply it to specific other styles if I want. You can see there's a whole bunch of styles kind of built in. I can apply it to one or more of those, or I can choose to reset the style or even create a new style. So if I say, hey, I like this blue square and I want to create a new style, I might call it a new style and call it, my selection box. And then I've got a new style created, and then I could come over here and I could change this to selection box, and it changes it automatically. So that's the style. And as we look at the properties window, we've got some things here: replace modified styles. This one, the second one, is a key one. Any smart shape can be created as a button. So I can click that, use as a button, and you watch when I do that. When I check it or uncheck it, if you look right underneath it, right now I just have, the default is I have style and options tabs. When I click that use as a button, a third option appears, which is my actions, which tells me that I can now start to put some actions on that button. And then this undock from fluid box, and we'll go over fluid boxes hopefully at the end. If not, there's a whole webinar blogs on fluid boxes that was done well. Next down is the basics. The basic properties of the shape. I can change the shape here to some of the more common shapes. If I wanted it to be a triangle, I could change that. I could go in and change it to a hexagon really quickly. I can change the fill type and fill color, or what's in there, whether it's a color or if it's an image or a gradient, I can change that as well. I can change the opacity. And then the lines, which is the outline. Right now there's no line. If I go in and I say I want it to be a 4 size line and I want it to be yellow, then you can see that it puts a yellow line around the outside. The next part down is the character. This is where the font of inside of this, any shape can have text typed right on it. And so this is where the properties of that text come in. So it's nice that you don't always have to put a text box on top of a shape. You can do it right in the shape. But the caveat is that sometimes you don't have as much control over the spacing and the formatting of that text within the shape. You can change fonts. You can change the font weight, whether it's bold or italic or whatever, and the font size. You can create bullets, things, and the alignment. But as far as going in and doing some of the more granular things that you could do in a text box, you don't have all the same tools or the ability to adjust kind of the where it sits in the shape.
So Adam, we've got a question come up here.
Okay.
When you're creating new default styles and you save them, do they exist across all of your Captivate projects, or just the one that it's being changed in?
It's just in the one that's being changed in, but we will get to that as well. There are ways that you can export them and save them out to other styles. And again, if I don't get to that, and it's a question I will try to come back to in the webinar recap to show you that. I kind of want to make sure that we're not jumping all over the place.
Okay, that's great.
Okay. And then you can see, so that's kind of the properties panel here for what you've got under the style. And as we look at the options, you can see that there's a few other options here in terms of I could add audio to a shape. I can transform the angle of it, do some things like that. I can flip it horizontally, vertically, so forth. So there's not a lot there under options, but there are a few little things under options. The big one comes under the actions, which again we'll get to in just a minute. So that's your properties panel, and it's going to change slightly based on what you have. If it's a text box, you're going to get slightly different things. You know, if I go in and I insert a text caption, I'm going to see something different. You know, I've got a caption type here. There's several different caption types that are kind of built in. I kind of like to just do, you know, kind of make my own. But again, there's a folder that you can go out, and there's a whole bunch more that aren't listed by default that you can go sort of see them and get a feel for them. So I can go to the more folder, and there's a lot of these pre-built in. You notice they're all kind of, there are various configurations of them as far as speech bubbles or just a blank without the little speech bubble attachment on them. So there are lots of different ones you can do there. I like to do a transparent one, but you could grab any kind of one you want, and then you see if it's got a call out or not to turn it into a speech bubble and where that call out falls. So you can see that the properties panel changes based on whatever you put in here based on this, but some of the things are the same. It's got a name, it's got default states, and it's got some default items here. I can also, with text boxes, give some shadow and reflection. Again, a few little minor imaging here. There's a little bit of inner and outer kind of things, or none, and then there's a reflection tool as well. So again, it may not be quite as robust in terms of that kind of things as you might be used to in some of the other tools that are out there, but it does have some of that as well. So that's the properties panel. So any other questions on the properties panel before I move on?
I'm not seeing questions particularly about this panel.
Okay.
I am seeing questions about the difference between Captivate 9 and subsequent features in 2017.
Okay.
For example, this person is using Captivate 9 and they don't see a selection box style name in Captivate 9. Is that a new feature, or is that in Captivate 9 and just found elsewhere? A
selection box style? You mean like this style name box, I'm assuming?
Yes.
That I believe is across the board. That depends on what kind of object you've got selected. Again, you know, you may not see the same thing, but as far as I remember, that's in 9 as well. The big things that are new to 2017 are, you notice if you're in 9, there would be breakpoints across the top here, and that's not in 2017. 2017, they use fluid boxes. You can do it. Like I could go in and use breakpoint mode, which is a whole different webinar and showing you how to use breakpoint mode. But Captivate 2017 uses something called fluid boxes, which lets you put stuff in a fluid box and do some adjustment that way. And that will appear differently on the properties panel as well.
One other follow-up from the lock states. For clarification, the request was if clicking on the lock state once as opposed to clicking on it twice, the first state is activated after the first click. It will lock only size and position, but you can still select and change the other object properties. The second is a full lock.
That's right. So
thank you for clarification on the question and clarification on a great response.
Yes, that was a great response. Thank you. Okay, so one of the things I showed you that I can go in and change colors and fonts and things here, but really the best way to do it is to go into your Object Style Manager before you ever start a course. So it's under, if you need to see how I got to that, it's up here under Edit. And then the second one from the bottom is the Object Style Manager, or Shift F7. And it comes in and out, gives me, this is where all my styles are. You can see I've got standard objects, and it's got captions, and each of these is expandable. Obviously, I can say text captions. It shows me down below as I go through these what they are. If I want to go to a button, it'll give me some examples here. Again, I can go to a default image button. I can change it to where it's normal, rollover state, things like that. So I can change all these things in here and then save them out. So this is where I would import or export to a file that I could then pull into other projects, into other libraries. So I could, if I had one saved, I could go out and import it and go grab it and bring it in, or I could export it out if I made changes. But this way, if you do it here before you start, and you kind of say, what do I want when I bring a smart shape in, what do I want my default smart shape to be? Do I want it to be blue? Do I want it to be, this font, whatever? Then if you do it first before you start the project, then it's much easier than trying to, go through and manipulate it later, although it can be done with that apply styles to existing changes. And sometimes that's good if you just want to change it for this project. But, sometimes you might have a style guide that you're following, a corporate style guide or a client style guide that he says, I want all my buttons to have these states. There's a rollover, a hover, and a down state, and I want the down state to be, kind of the mirror image of the normal state. And so you can go in and create all that in advance and then save it out and save it for that project, as well as then export it and have it be able to be shared with other people. And so this object style manager is one of those really powerful things a lot of people don't realize until they sort of stumble across it. But it's really the preferred way of setting your styles rather than doing it on the fly like I've been doing and showing you here.
Can you give a little clarification of what you mean by down state?
Okay, so a down state, if you think about a button, the hover is when I hover over it. The down state would be when I've clicked on it and it's been sometimes called selected or visited state. So usually a button has an up or a normal state. There's the hover state. There's the down state, which you might want it to change as I click on it. But then there would also be perhaps a selected or a visited state, which would be now it's been selected, and so it changes a different color. So I can have different things on that just to give it a little bit of life, I guess. It makes it so that it's obvious that they've clicked on it. So as they hover over it, it might highlight or grow big a little bit or put a little shadow around it to say this is the one you're about to click on. They click on it, they see it move, it changes to a down state. A lot of people just say, I just want to select it in a hover state and a normal state, but everyone kind of has their own preferences as to what they do. So remember to use that object style manager to change your styles. And like I said, there's a lot of powerful things here. There's your dialogues, your quizzing tools, what those are going to look like, your standards objects. And there's so many in here. And then again, you can go build them. You can even clone them. So if I want to clone one and say, okay, I like everything about this except the color, so I'm just going to clone it, and then I can change that color and go from there. You also see it's got a default transition. So it may say I want it to fade in and out. Maybe you just want it to fade in only or fade out only or have no transition. So you can change all that as well. So make sure you're using that object style manager. One of the other tabs you see on the right over here is your timings tab. And this is where, if I've got a shape selected, this is where I can start to set some of those times that you see on the timeline. I can say show up for a specific time, show up for the rest of the slide, or show up for the project. And this time here is a specific time. And you can see as I put my mouse over it, you get sort of this two-sided arrow with a line in the middle. That means if I just scroll my mouse wheel, it will change it just by me rolling the mouse wheel, or I can click on it and go from there or type it in as well. You can see that it's set to appear right now after a certain number of seconds. And right here on this one, because I made it a button, so you can see down here on the timeline, it put a pause in. And the default for the pause is after 1.5 seconds. But I could change that. If I wanted it to go all the way, my slide is, 11 seconds long. If I wanted that to go to pause after 10.5 seconds, then it puts that pause there. Maybe I want this to go for the rest of slide. So then that pause comes right at the end. or 9.5 because it starts a second in or a second and a half in. But you can see it puts that pause right at the end. And so I can adjust where that pause comes. So if I want the whole slide to run, the thing to remember is that if you put a pause in, anything that's set, if I have that pause at 3 seconds, and then I have this shape set to appear after 3 seconds, I won't see this rectangular shape here until after the user has interacted with the slide, or until after I've done whatever's going to release that pause. And so that's something to remember, is that anything that appears after that pause, that shows up after that, won't appear until the interaction happens. So that's a good way if you've got like a feedback box or something that you need to appear or things like that. That's a good place to put it. This timing panel is also where you can do some of the animations. You can do a self-timed animation that will or there's you can apply some effects. You can go out and get some of these basic effects on it. I can go in and I can put in, right now it's got no transition. I can change it to do some different things. I've got your basic, your emphasis, your entrance. Usually I want an entrance effect, and so I might say, okay, I want this to ease in from the right. And so I can see what that's going to look like. It's going to kind of come in and fade in that way. And I can show down here is where I can start to change some of these things, what the ease percentage is, things like that. If I want to show or hide the motion path. Sometimes developers don't like to see these motion paths because they get so many on the slide that it gets confusing. And so I can take off that motion path, and then I can tell when I want it to start and end, and then, or when I want it to start and how long I want it to last. And then if there is a transition, I can put a transition on that as well, as far as fade in and out. And so you've got all those different types of animations. If I want to get rid of one, I can just delete it. I want to delete the desired effect. Okay, so now I can go back and I can select again one of these 5 categories, and then within each category there are a set of animations or effects that are applied as well. So questions?
Yeah, a few more questions have come in. One is, how do you enable that dark gray bar above the master slide where you can change the preview in option in the drop-down field? Some people aren't seeing that in theirs. Is that able to be enabled or disabled that you know of?
The only way to enable it or disable it is depending on what type of project. If you're doing a responsive project, it will show up. If you are doing a non-responsive or a basic project, you won't see it because there's no need for it. And so when you start Captivate, when you start a new project, if you are starting a blank project, that bar won't show up. If you're starting a responsive project, it will show up.
Okay, another button or another question is, if you only have a next button on a slide, is a pause required?
If you don't have a pause in there, it's going to automatically jump. The next button, if you put it in as a button and have some interactivity, it will put a pause in for you. So you don't need a separate pause outside of that. But if you don't put a pause in, it will just go to the next slide automatically. If you don't create a button, or if you take the pause out, that next button will be ineffective. By default, when you create something as a button, it puts a pause in for you. You can take it out theoretically, but then the button is essentially ineffective.
Okay, great. So that's all the questions we'll take right now.
Okay, so we've shown you the properties and the timing. We've talked about this position panel as well. Again, you can see that this is where you would change your different absolute position. Any of these panels, if they have the little blue eye, you can pull up and it can give you some information about it. I'd like to make sure to look at those. Then I can also set, lock the size and position or do a smart position, which will tell me, again, give me some places that I can, when I click that smart position, this is when I can get the anchors. And what that does is that says, maybe I want this, let's see, it's a hexagon, I guess. Maybe I don't want it anchored to the left side or the right side of the slide, but maybe I want it anchored to this other blue shape. And so I can anchor it by dragging that to the other blue shape. And that means that those shapes will always be 40% apart. And so that's what that smart positioning does. Or I could say, maybe I wanted to anchor to, the edge of this white box instead of the edge of the slide, so that I keep this white frame, this kind of white overlay there. And I want it to always be, that anchored that distance from the edge of that white box. So then as I shift down in the sizes, it will always stay right to the edge of that box. And so that's what that smart positioning is about. The smart position brings up these anchor points, or some people call them top hats or whatever, but they give you this ability to anchor to different objects or to anchor to different points on the slide. And so that's the position panel. And again, you see there's at the top of most of these, there's this little kind of this hamburger menu option. I can go to and down and apply it to all items of this type, or apply to all items of the same style. And so if I want to make a position change and then apply that to all objects of the, of the same style, I can select that option and it will go through and it will do that as well. So there are other panels up here. Another good one to think about is your library. This is, again, this shows you kind of all the things that you can use. This is where it's really good to use. You can bring in objects from other libraries. Anything you bring in, like if you bring in all your images, it will go in and it will show you, it's got my images here that I've used throughout this template, and I can go grab those. And so then if I want it on this slide, if I want these arrows on this slide, I can go grab them and drag them in and just put them right on that slide. So it's already there. So it functions a little as a library, as a storage of things. And you see there's several different categories here. It's got a background, which is, I can get rid of it. I can bring stuff in. It also tells me, this is nice, tells you how often it's used. So it shows me that this image 03 is used 4 times. And I can click on that and I can see a little bit about it. I can click on this usage button to tell me where is it used. And so it tells me it's used on master slide 2, master slide 17, 18, and 21. And so that helps me to know, okay, where is this slide? Where is this used? And how do I go do it? And you can see here is where I could change the name of it. So I could go update it if I wanted to say, horizontal building, and then click update. And you see it change the name over here in my library. The update is if I've got that image saved out on my computer somewhere, and it goes and updates out there. So you can see it changed it out there, or it changed it here. I can go in and I can edit, where it comes from, things like that. I can also import as well. So that library is a powerful tool to use. There's a lot of good information there. Yes?
So we have a few questions about the library. Do library assets work across projects or just across slides?
They can work across projects. Again, it's an export-import thing here, where I can export my library, save it out somewhere. If I want to export the whole library, I can do that. I can open a new library, go grab a library. I can export an asset individually. I can export the library as a whole, or import a library as a whole and go grab it. Okay.
Another question is, I noticed that the library even still shows images put in, but then deleted. Is that the case?
Yes. Anything that, so, like this background, it has 0 usage, and I can actually click this, select unused items, and it will go through and show me which ones are unused. Some of them you might have 40 or 50 of those. And that's a good way to say, hey, if you don't want them, you can click that button and say, okay, get rid of all these. I've selected them all, and I'm going to hit the garbage can icon to delete them. But yes, it keeps them all in there. If you've brought in an image or an object into your project, it's going to keep it in the library. It doesn't take up space in your project, because when you publish a project, all it's publishing is what's there. It's not publishing your library. So it's a kind of a nice storage space for you to keep items there. Just sometimes your library can get cluttered, particularly if you have a lot of these just sort of generic sounding names. It can get hard to manage and remember where they are. So if you're not naming your images, or a developer before you hasn't named them, using that, select unused items can really help you, and getting rid of them will help you manage that. But do
you get rid of them just by clicking on each one individually and deleting from the library?
No, I can, if I had multiple, it would highlight all of them. Right now I just have the one that's not used. But when I click this button, this select unused items, it will select all of them that are unused, that have a 0 in that usage count. And then I can click the delete button, the trash can icon, and it will delete all of them. If I want to delete them individually, I can go in and click on them and delete them individually as well. So I could just click on it and click the trash can and do it that way. But if I want to delete all of them, I just select the unused items, and that you'll see the gray lines or the blue lines on all of them, and then delete them.
So as a practice, do you, as a developer, generally maintain a library of images and sound and things like that for general use? Or
I do. Yeah, I have, especially if I'm doing a project for a specific company, I will have all their icons stored in a library. I will have, the images. A lot of times when you use like avatars or characters, they'll have certain poses that they like, or that have seemed to work, and so I will use those. If I've got concepts I'm teaching, maybe I'm teaching about endurance, and I want to show a marathon runner, and I've liked this pose. And if I've made edits to images, so if I've gone into Illustrator or Photoshop or other image editing tools and cropped and put on some shading or some recoloring or whatever and save those, I want to save those in a library so that I don't have to do that every time and go in or go find them on my computer somewhere. They're just right there in Captivate. I can just import that library and bring it in.
Excellent. All right, that's all the questions at this point.
Okay, so again, like I said, there's a lot to cover here, and I know there's a lot of questions that are going to come up. There's other panels that will appear over here. You can see I've got a quiz panel and a drag and drop panel. If I had those interactions, they would come up. Really, the best thing I can suggest is, go in and play with them, see what they do, go from there. So you can see there's a whole lot of different things in here that you can bring in and show as well. Some of them come in by default, some of them come in once you put them in, and so forth. So so that's kind of the main thing to think about. As the next one I want to talk about is, like other e-learning tools and like PowerPoint and other tools, Captivate uses a master slide technology where I can create a set of master slides. I can have my top layer, my master that sort of defines the background color, things like that. You can see it really just has, I can create a project background, or I can create a custom background. I can have it be a picture, a fill, and then from there I can create what are called layouts, these different sort of other that take that master slide then and put different images on top of it. And so I can go in and I can create different layouts. Some of them are already pre-built, and there are placeholders in there. So these are all placeholders so that when I go in and do it. So a master slide is very useful. A lot of people who are new to the e-learning world don't always think about using master slides when you're creating a project. But if you're going to have a lot of slides that are pre-built out, or that are going to be the same layout essentially, because you've designed, you want a logo to appear in the same place on all of them, or you want your next button to appear in the same place on all of them, you can do that on a master slide and send it out, rather than trying to do it individual slide and copy and pasting, or even doing the, show for rest of project across the bottom there on the timeline. So make sure you're looking at the master slides. There's a lot of good use you can do, and you can also have several sets of masters. So if I had this flat blue theme, if I wanted to bring in another master as well, I could do another master that would have a shamrock theme or whatever, and then I could go in and select. And when I'm in the properties view, if I've got my slide selected, you can see over here it's telling me that this slide uses title slide option 2, and I can change which layout it uses just by clicking that little arrow next to it. And then I can go down and I can select the one I want. Unfortunately, this doesn't let you scroll your mouse wheel. You have to scroll through the list, you have to click these arrows at the top and bottom. But I could go through and I could say, I want this to use page title 10, and it's going to change that layout for me. Or I can reset the master slide to that one, for instance. So I can go through and I can go back and say, okay, I want it to be that one. So I can change which master slide this slide is using just by that. You notice also on the properties panel that my slide doesn't have a name. It's a blank name up here. So that's pretty important to have your slides have names, because that's where your table of contents is going to pull from. And so you give it a name, you see it appears on your film strip view over here. This slide number 1 is called title because I just gave it this name here. So we've gone through a lot of that. One thing I want to run through really quickly are these actions. So an action is essentially something, as you've created a button, this is telling the button what you want it to do. And so you can see that there's a lot of different actions here on my actions tab in the properties inspector. On success, which means when I click the button, what's going to happen? I can go to the next slide, I can go to the last slide, I can return to a quiz, I can assign variables, I can increment or decrement variables, I can apply an effect, show a table of contents, hide table of contents, lock it, unlock it. I can take no action if I want. I can execute JavaScript, or this most common one is advanced actions, which then lets you go in and do some scripting. And this is a topic for another course in itself, just because there's a lot there. But this is where you can do a step-by-step, have a series of actions in there, create a shared or a conditional action, things like that. So just understand that an action is when I click on this button, what is that action that happens? And I can set it to say, do I want it to be for infinite attempts? Do I want it to be one attempt or a certain number of attempts, and what happens on the final attempt? I can create a shortcut if I want, to where it's a keyboard shortcut here. I can display a caption, so if I click success, it's going to put in a default success caption. So I could say, hey, good job, you did it. If I don't want that, I can get rid of it. I can put in a hint caption, say, hey, you might want to try clicking over here. I can also change it to a hand cursor, so that if I want, as they come over, it changes to a hand so that they can see that that's a clickable spot. I can make it a double click instead of a single click. So again, if I'm simulating a double click on a screen grab, I can make it a double click, and I can even by default, it will put a click sound in. If I don't want it to hear that click sound, I can get rid of it, which is my personal preference. I get rid of that click sound. And then also, if I want it to report to a quiz, so this is for your tracking and so forth. If I want to say, hey, they did this successfully, I can ask it to include it in the quiz, and then I can tell, how many points it gets, add to the total, or report the answers, so forth. So I can uncheck that, and then I don't have any of those options. So those are the actions. One of the things that somebody brought up that I just kind of want to make sure you touch on are, when you're creating a project in Captivate, you have this great tool of assets. There's all sorts of things up here on the ribbon that you can look at. There's themes that change the look and feel of it. There's your fluid boxes, which again we talked about with responsive design, text, shape, objects, so forth. You can record media, but the one that is most useful to getting started is this assets button. And you see when you open that, there are 3 different buckets or 3 different tabs here, and then under the default one, the My Assets, there are these 4 categories. The one that we obviously here want to focus on is get free e-learning assets. You're given a whole bunch of these free e-learning assets with your Captivate subscription. So I can go in and I can say I want to get a cutout person, and I can go grab a student, and now I've got hundreds of these people that can come in with all sorts of different poses that I can go bring right into my Captivate, and I can go grab them and pull them in directly into my project. Or I can go get a game and bring it in and bring it right into my into my project. And you can see when I go to my assets, it puts in some people here. Not all right now, not all of these characters are working in 2017. Adobe has a hiccup. You might have to go download it from your computer and bring it in. Some of them come in here, some of them don't, and we haven't figured out yet what the differences are. But it should, once Adobe gets it fixed, it should put it right here into your window, and you'll have a whole bunch of characters here. Your projects and other objects go into your projects field here, and you can see that I've already downloaded a bunch of things that you can play with and look at as well. There's some that are work really well in 2017. And the nice thing is with all those, you can change the colors and skin them to however you want. The stock assets is if you have Adobe stock images, that's going to pull into your media tab. And then your themes, again, you can go out to our free e-learning assets, and we have themes that you can download as well. You can get them from here, or you can get them within Captivate right here from your themes tab and go browse for more. And that opens your window to go find them. So there's a lot you can do. There's a lot to Captivate. We're kind of bumping up against a time limit here, and so I wanted to quickly run through that, and also to let you know that while yes, you get a free subscription to Captivate, there's also a whole bunch more on our library that you can go look at, that you should go look at here, and we'll cover that in just a minute. But let's pause for any final questions, and then we'll kind of wrap things up. So Andrew, are there any questions?
Yeah, Adam, we have quite a few questions here about master slides. What we're going to do, because like you said, we are out of time, what we'll do is in this webinar recap, we'll dedicate a large section of space to master slides.
Right, and there are other blogs and webinars that I've done that talk about, kind of go a little more in depth on master slides, and we'll make sure to link to those as well. In the
we'll get those linked recap. In the email, so you guys that have questions right now can look those up while they're fresh on your mind. We'll get the email out to you in the next hour or two that'll have a recording of this webinar, and we'll get links out for you. Adam, would you like to talk to us about, so Captivate, like you just mentioned, already has loads of assets, but there's more that are available through eLearning Brothers. You can learn about those on eLearningBrothers.com. You can go to library.elearningbrothers.com if you'd like to see what Adam is showing you right here, exactly what you can and can't find in the library that isn't included in Captivate. You can give us a call. You can send an email to support@elearningbrothers.com if you have technical questions, or info@elearningbrothers.com if you want to see more of these templates in action. Anything else on that subject, Adam? So
yeah, just make sure, go out to our website and check it out. See what's out there. There's a free library of stuff, so you can kind of get a feel for what some of these different things are. But also, we have a one-on-one mentoring service that means if you're in the middle of because so many of you are new to Captivate, if you say, hey, I want to purchase this one-on-one mentoring, that gives you an hour of time in 6 different blocks of, I guess you get 6 one-hour sessions that you can sit down with one of our experts, whether it's me or somebody else, and work on your project specifically. You can share your screen and say, hey, I've got this project. I'm trying to troubleshoot this one thing. How do I do this? And so one of us will sit down with you and walk through that. And it's really nice. It's kind of outside of the webinars. It's a big group thing and lots of questions coming in and sort of a generic topic. The one-on-one mentoring gives you a chance to really get that hands-on, personalized attention that you want. And so I would encourage you to look at that as well. And if you're part of a bigger company, encourage them to purchase it, because it's, while we call it one-on-one, you could actually have 3 or 4 people from your company all sit in on the phone call and ask their questions. But again, it's working on your project with one of our experts. So that's really it. Look at our library, look at what's out there, try to take advantage of that one-on-one mentoring, and feel free to ask us any questions over the support or info lines as well. Absolutely. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Thanks for giving us this awesome walkthrough, Adam. And be looking for the email in the next little bit, and the recap with answers about master slides next week. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.